you, Sean. Please stay with us. Can I invite the other participants, the other speakers to come back online for our final round table, because we seem to have just been running one into the other now. And I think there's a lot of issues that have come up this afternoon that have a resonance with issues that were discussed this morning. I think the environmental one is one that actually is fascinating, because I think it's maybe an area for significant opportunity in the highways sector, whereas for a lot of the time we've maybe seen it as a significant threat, because we've seen it around emissions and we've seen it as something that threatens business models, but maybe there are a large number of opportunities there. So we've got our last round table session, which is the final session of the day. And I really wanted to just sort of recap on some of the things that we've discussed. The four principles that we had established for discussion today were productivity and economy, skills and diversity, collaboration, and sustainability and resilience. And I think for me, with an awareness that there was always going to be some kind of overlap between those four areas, I found that actually the synergies are immense. The integration and importance of all of these areas to each other, one cannot function without the other, is quite marked. And I'd like to revisit some of those areas and see if we can actually sort of try and start to flesh out some next steps if we can. We can start maybe with some of the funding issues. We talked about the challenges around CapEx and revenue of TOTEX funding, and it's an issue that's been, I think, has been done to death, to be honest with you. But I would like to hear people's views. Do you think it's actually possible that we could formalise those as two processes that run together and provide highway authorities with an opportunity to take the option, so that rather than it sort of being haphazard, so it's a conscious decision taken? What's the benefits of one against the benefits of another? I don't want to discuss those particular details, just the practicalities of maybe allowing highway authorities to make a formal choice and to allow government to actually promote those as two structures that can be used rather than just letting it happen. So I'm interested to hear people's perspectives on that. Sean, Mark, Dom.
You just pick on the ones that have opposing views to start with.
Well, that's all good, Sean.
Yeah, I think my views, as you said, it has its benefits for me. Do we have that personal choice as authorities? I think we'd look to our colleagues at SIPFA and things such as that to actually assist in that. I think whether it's TOTEX, whether it's CapEx, whether it's, we stick with the revenue and capital model. I think what you find more and more, and I know, Mark, you mentioned that we're capital poor and revenue destitute, but we're still in the situation as local authorities where we're trying to capitalise as much as we possibly can. So we're almost doing it a little bit by stealth almost. And I think it's the flexibility of our financial colleagues and the understanding and pushing the boundaries of, what is an activity that is eligible for that capital expenditure as opposed to that revenue expenditure.
That's a good point, Sean. And I think that's one of the issues. Someone mentioned gaming the contracts in an earlier presentation. I think if you have a two fixed capital and revenue split, what you find is people doing very strange things to fit with funding revenues rather than doing the best thing that they want to do to improve the outcomes.
Yeah.
Mark, do you want to raise there?
Yeah, I was going to say that part of the conversation I had with MHC, LG and DFT representatives last year clarify the extent to which there is a blurring that Sean describes, in the sense that we are using some capital funding to prop up revenue spent. It was fascinating. The guys from MHC, LG had no idea about what we use our revenue funding for in a higher context. So it was a bit of an eye-opener for them in terms of what's going on. But it was also an eye-opener for the guys from DFT, in the sense that they had no idea that the capital was being used in that way. So effectively I left them to say, and with the thought that, well, what they needed to do was actually prop up both the revenue and the capital, which is where I was coming from in the first place anyway. but they both got their message very clearly. And there was actually a slight increase in the amount of revenue funding going to local authorities in the autumn of 2019. I'm not going to say it's down to that conversation, but it helped reinforce the principle that there is this real problem in terms of how you fund it. And in terms of where we stand at the moment, interesting enough that they talk about the Cumbria Live Labs in the same way as we've got one at Suffolk. There's a real problem in terms of how that work is being funded, because it is a solely capital allocation. And yet colleagues in finance departments are turning around sort of saying, well, you've got a revenue element to that. And what do you mean? Well, you're spending your time on it. Yes, but it's research. No, but research is still revenue funding. So we've got colleagues in our finance department trying to hive off some revenue funding to cover the revenue cost of an entirely funded capital programme. And it's actually because they're getting confused about it. But equally, they're concerned about the external auditors coming in and saying, well, you spent all this capital funding, should have been revenue. So it's a real complication around the whole issue. But the nub of it is there's not enough revenue and there's not enough capital. So from my perspective, it doesn't make a lot of difference. So we can all play the games that we play in terms of shifting the money around. But what has actually hit home with both those departments is that we are at rock bottom in terms of what we have overall. And equally at a local level, we have cut down, not to the bone in terms of the amount of funding, but down into the marrow. So during the course of this last 12 months at Suffolk, the councils have recognised that. And they're saying, well, why aren't we doing this anymore? Because you've taken the money out to help fund children and adults. Okay, so they've actually put money back into highways at a revenue level because we've actually had to take it so far, and the steps we're having to take and the impact it has overall. So the landscape is one in which more funding is needed. That's recognised within government. That's why you've got the likes of MHCLG and DEFRA and DFT all now bidding for more funding to help us look after our highway infrastructure assets.
There's an interesting subtext to a lot of that as well, of course, is the fact that you actually asked, in HGMA days, and we actually asked for a physical amount of money that the Ministry for Communities and Local Government and Housing provided for roads. We were told, we don't do anything with roads. What are you talking about? Actually, the knowledge that actually money went into highways was among certain parts of that department just didn't exist. I think it does throw an interesting point there, though, is the fact that that money perhaps needs to be ring-fenced into roads to actually secure the longer-term surety for our highway departments. And now that won't be popular amongst a number of local authorities. It'll be very popular amongst highways and transportation professionals, but not so much amongst politicians and maybe the county treasurers and the city treasurers. But in talking to government, maybe that's one of the things that we need to say. Maybe it's not actually important whether it's CapEx or TOTEX or whatever, but what's important is that the money goes to where it's allocated to, and actually that to create that fundamental change, and actually tie that in with other aspects of environmental policy, etc., etc.
And I think that's really important, George. The fact is that, you know, whether it's through ADEPT, the Highways Council, LCRIG, IEMA, whoever, you know, it's pushing forward that conversation with central government, you know, to assist them in the thinking. You know, the fact is that they're as departmentalised as everybody else. Sometimes the departments don't talk to each other. I think we all need, we smirk, Mr. Stevens, but I think it's a fact of life, isn't it?
They don't talk to one another, that's fact.
Yeah, so, you know, that's what we need to do as industry, as sector leaders, as sector managers, as sector, you know, champions. We just need to keep niggling and niggling and niggling. And, you know...
But the reality is that there's absolutely no appetite whatsoever to put ring fencing into highways. They will not. We've asked the question time and time again. There's no interest at a government official level, nor is there any interest at cabinet or ministerial level. They just don't want to do it. Part of that's down to, sorry, Sean, it's part of it, I think, is down to the protection of those departments, those government departments, because DFT is solely about capital and MHCLG is solely about revenue. So if you're going to talk about bringing the two together, unless you're going to bring those two government departments together, it's not going to happen.
Mark, what about, I was struck by your thing when you said that, you know, you'd need you've got enough money to redo the roads every 200 years and the footways every 400 years. To me, that's inherently unsustainable in the sense that, in the same way as the NHS, the amount we would like to spend, we will never ever be able to afford. So in that context, what about more radical funding solutions such as road charging? Because that would help with the sustainability angle, because progressive taxes are only punishing, and if you can think of it as punishing, the people who are using the system, so to speak. Obviously, there would have to be opt-outs for emergency services and critical freight, etc., etc. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts about alternative, well, being funded by the people rather than central taxation.
I think that's a whole different webinar.
Yeah, it is. It's a whole different ballgame altogether. I think part of the problem is that it depends upon which model you look at. Part of the conversation I had with the guys from MHCLG and DFT was to present three different perspectives. One was to look at the whole of government accounting, and if you look at it down that route, it gives you one answer, which suggests that you've got to increase your budgets by about 3 to 3.5 times. If you look at the alarm survey and deal with it on the basis of how much of a backlog exists, that means you've got to double it. And then if you use a blend of all of those and some of the situation we have in Suffolk, which according to the alarm report suggests that we're sort of in between everybody across the country, I did that local perspective, and it indicated that doubling the budget would actually enable us to look after the road network, and we wouldn't see that deterioration across the network in the same way as we would do if we don't have doubling of that funding. And it holds it together, so that the principle of rebuilding roads isn't necessarily required, but maintaining them more effectively is. And we can maintain them far more effectively, intervene at the right time if there's more funding and allowing us to do that. And we can actually use the right process of looking after that in terms of asset management, not just looking to go and strip and resurface, but surface stress, micro surface, whatever it might be, to extend the life as much as possible. That's the true asset management approach. You can do it, but if you're looking to replace it, those frequencies I talked about is where it comes into play. But you don't need to do that, because it's about recycling. It's that circular economy driving the sort of extension of assets to their fullest extent as much as you can into the future. And the extent to which we deploy that, use new technology, new techniques, bring some innovation into the industry and take it forward in that way. But doubling the amount of money that's spent compared to that 1 billion, increasing that to 2 billion a year, you're in the right ballpark. But at the moment, we're nowhere close.
And I think we can actually listen to the fact that asset management, Mark, you're absolutely right. We all remember the deterioration curve and where we intervene, etc. But the industry does influence sometimes, because you look at the incentive fund. The incentive fund was there to incentivize authorities to take a better asset management approach to the maintenance of the network, and that came on board. We're all level 3 now, of course, aren't we? But that was the purpose of looking at a slightly different funding opportunity to incentivize those people that are maintaining good practice. So it goes back to what I was saying before. I know it's a utopian position, and I'll be long retired, if not dead, by the time the two departments come together. But we've got to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing, because things may change occasionally.
Can I promote a concept here, actually? Sorry, Gary.
No, that's fine. You keep
I promote a concept here because there's a very grave danger that we actually go back into the same old pattern that we've been over the years. And we know the results from that. We don't get what we want. We get maybe small levels of increase here and there. But one of the reasons why we looked at Build Back Better was the integration of, for want of a better structure, these 4 constituent parts. Now, we've just talked about the funding element very much in the tradition of how we talked about funding element. They won't ring fence it, and they won't bring those departments together. And that may well be absolutely right, because they've resisted all of that. But equally, coming out the back end of this crisis that the country is in at the moment, whenever that is, whether it's by Christmas or next summer or whatever, that we're going to have a government that is going to be absolutely desperate for a plan and a structure and a way out, because things are going to be so bad, whether that's by their mismanagement or whether it's by just circumstances and moot point. So actually conceptualizing and say, you have a number of priorities, government. You want to level up. You want to meet environmental objectives and targets. You want to kickstart the economy. You want to reduce unemployment. Well, we can actually offer you a package that actually can deliver not utopia, because that's a nonsense, but can deliver a significant change in those areas where you want to see significant change. And this is the structure that we think you need to put in place. If you invest in your highways, we can more or less guarantee an uplift in productivity through better skilled management, better skilled operatives, innovative techniques, innovative materials. They are out there, we've discussed that today. To do that, you need to put in place innovative funding structures, and you need to allow us to empower SMEs as well as large organisations through better contract structures. Now, it's not beyond us, and it's not beyond the group of people that have participated in this event, dipping in and out and being there all day, etc., to actually bring together those ideas, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And actually taking some of the things that we don't believe we can ever get and actually structuring them into something that we think we possibly could deliver might just provide us with the opportunity to do that. And I'd be interested whether that's, I mean, I'm fairly old and hackneyed myself, so I'm not totally naive, but there may be scope to actually do something like this. And if we don't try, we will never find out. They'll not ever say no, but you never know. They might just actually say, well, we'll do 50% of that and we'll be substantially further forward. So I'd be interested to know whether people feel that that may be an opportunity, or do we just keep on banging away on the things that we've been banging away on for some time and getting our marginal gains when we get them?
I think in terms of banging away, George, there is some success in that, in terms of the, as I said, if we were doubling our £1 billion to £2 billion a year for highway maintenance, we'd be in the right ballpark. And that message actually got filtered through to ministers, and the comment I had coming back was, well, we only thought they needed about 10% more. So that 10% more suddenly became £500 million, which is 50% more. So we started to make some serious inroads in there, but that was regarded as being affordable at the time. And this is pre-COVID. And the view was that for the forthcoming 5-year settlement for comprehensive spending review, we were going to see more than that 50% increase coming through. So the message has been understood. It's sort of a question of, is there still enough of an appetite in amongst all of the other challenges that sit there with COVID-19 and what the current country can afford? I'm conscious I sort of dodged the question that Reef was put in terms of road charging. I was actually lucky enough to get away to France for holiday this year. So I got used to sort of paying the tolls at the at péage every time you sort of rolled up to one. But you know, to what extent has that been a success on the M6 toll? Not really. You know, the British public don't have any appetite for going down that route, and that's partly because in many respects people think that they're paying for it already through their road tax and the levy on fuel. But obviously the DfT and the government have an issue with that, with the move to electric vehicles, because that funding stream in the future is going to disappear, or very much disappear within the next 15 or 20 years or so. So they've got to come up with a solution anyway. But the issue of road charging and how do you pay for it all came up at the Transport Select Committee inquiry into local roads funding and governance back in 2018, early 19. And I remember that question being put to me by the chair. And I said, well, you know, part of the problem is that you don't look at it from the overall perspective about what happens in terms of road deterioration. And most of the deterioration in the network actually comes from the goods vehicles. They're the ones that you actually think about in terms of destroying roads. They're the ones that can actually go down a country lane, just rip it apart in one pass, as opposed to you can have hundreds of little cars go down and no impact whatsoever. The big concern, this is something I got asked about from the DfT a couple of weeks ago, is the fact that with the decarbonisation programme, there's a look to move away from fossil fuel HGVs to ones that either have electric power systems or alternative fuel drive systems. But what that does is add a ton to 2 tons to the weight of that vehicle. So that actually means that in the future, either the payloads on vehicles have got to be less, or we're going to be seeing even more damage to our roads and bridges in the future, so that the rate of deterioration is going to go even faster. So there's a real, unless you're sort of seeing all the parts of the picture, you don't actually know how you can actually paint it. And that's part of the problem at the moment, that nobody really has a firm handle on what does it really look like in the future. What is it we're really going to face before you can actually start working out what the solutions might be.
So we're back to
Can I jump in there? Because I was going to raise the issue of electrification, electric vehicles. For the first time, the latest stats from the DFT showed that alternative fuel cars, that's all alternative fuels, outsold diesels. So I think there's a tipping point there, and that's the real change to highways funding. Because, of course, you know, when we go over to electric vehicles, all bets are off in terms, you know, vehicle excise duties has to completely change. Lots of the money that's coming into ring fence the RIS for the national network, that's going to have to completely change. So they're going to have to look at a whole different way of funding local roads, and presumably something along the lines of road user charging, together with some revenue raising from local councils, perhaps through electric vehicle charging, could help pay for it. And that's one way of kind of, you know, squaring the circle, but potentially. But I take the point Mark makes about seeing the whole piece, because, you know, asphalt is already one of the most recycled products in the world. That unfortunately doesn't make the highways industry a great environmental champion, because everyone knows, you know, there are obviously problems with building new roads. Well, if we can look at the whole body of the materials and the whole piece about pollution and congestion, and put all of these factors together to create good places and create community plans, we can start to drive down pollution. We can start to maximize the life of these roads, which we can't afford to replace anyway, by skillful recycling and upcycling. But that means we need to be very careful when we're adding ideas like putting plastic into roads, because while I appreciate that it's a very complicated issue, I appreciate it sounds quite good on the face of it, but it could leave legacy problems. So yeah, there's you know, the full cycle is something that we need to look at.
Okay, personal point.
It's a very good point, Dom. I was going to invite, actually, maybe potentially a bit of fire, but certainly we can use it for constructive criticism from Rufus as being pan sector, and the most pan sector from highways, most divorced, if you could say, on this call. What would you say would be the burning platform from what we've heard through today that we should be addressing as a sector?
Well, the obvious one that no one wants to talk about is we need to drive down consumption, full stop. And I know that's wider than transport, but Mark just mentioned that the logistics lorries doing the biggest damage, etc. Why are there so many logistics lorries? Because we're buying too much stuff, you know, is the bottom line. And that's a cultural thing. And with the pandemic, you saw a bit of change in behaviours, and I think over the long term, sustainability in the round is about individual footprints being smaller and national footprints being smaller in terms of our consumption. That's the bottom line. And there's multiple ways to address that. It's not just buying less stuff and reusing more stuff, but that goes back to my earlier conversation about the road to net zero, etc. It's about, for example, if we are going to have heavier freight, and that freight should be restricted to freight strategic highway and network that is designed to take that weight, and they should not be driving all over the place on B roads, C roads, etc. That would change the location of some businesses, which might be currently located down a B road, down a C road, whatever. And moving entire businesses is a long-term policy, which would need to be as part of planning reform and you know, local plans, etc., about where are we locating our industry, and that industry, the location of those industries should be driven by strategic issues such as the location of the strategic logistics network, rather than who owns the land and they're quite fancy having a factory there, which is our current kind of market-led planning system. So
I think
I don't know if I answered the question, Gary, but you know, we need to be thinking more strategically.
Yeah, that's very good, Rufus. It is very much a long-term one and cultural and behavioural as opposed to something we do right here and now. But let's start a conversation. And just to you, Dom, then, you're in a position of not being an asset owner or a global council or an SME or a supplier or an industry professional or a consultant or a draftsman or anything like that. What would you say to us, factions of this sector, that we need to be doing to work more closely together?
That's a really good question. I think personally that there needs to be one of the problems that highways faces is when they come up with a good idea, people are naturally resistant to it. But once they've put it in for a couple of years, people think, oh, this is actually much nicer. I quite like my street quieter. The congestion charge in London, you know, most people are in favour of it now. But when you put it to a vote in Manchester, you know, they turned it down. My feeling is, I think we need to win a bit more support from the public and use that as a leverage against, I say against, but to encourage government to see our point of view. That requires us building in a kind of a blend of things. Firstly, the roads are built for people, not for cars. They're built for everyone. Everyone uses the road network. Everyone's, you know, a pedestrian, a user of the road network in some way. We need to find a way to provide people with what they really, really want from the road network. And that may be a better bus service. It may be better cycle lanes. But if we can do that and balance it with some of the things that we want to achieve, which is probably less congestion, because it's very difficult to manage congestion in an urban environment when you're basically at capacity, and you're certainly going to raise pollution problems. So I think some form of local regional plans that can win support from public, that we can then use to encourage government to give us what we want, but also to come back at the public at times if there is a bit of frustration with the local low traffic neighborhoods, as we've seen recently, to say to them, well, we consulted and you wanted safer streets outside schools. You wanted less pollution, and we're going to have to stick with this, and maybe we'll review it after 5 years. But yeah, that's one thing. Get the public on your side.
Very good. A good thing. So driving down consumption from Rufus and getting the public on our side from you, Don. That's good. Chris and Tim, well, we should shortly wind up for the day. George is going to do that. Do you have any comments from this, listening in on this last bit, Tim?
I think it's fantastic we're having the conversation. The rate of change that we need to meet our national targets is huge, and it remains a massive challenge for everybody, all sectors, rail, highways. But the fact you're discussing it and you're discussing the key issues is very positive. I'm personally very keen to keep in contact and support where I can. But no further advice than what's been discussed today.
Not much more from me. I think Rufus and Dom's points around consumption, need to travel, and serving everybody, I think are key things to keep at the centre of our mind going forward on what we're trying to achieve.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Back to you, George.
Yeah, I'm just quickly writing down a note in that way. Yeah, I think we've had a really broad-ranging discussion, and obviously this afternoon is focused very much on collaboration leading into the sustainability issues and issues surrounding funding, because of course funding is the critical driver, but it's very much the input. It's the input that allows us to create and generate an output. And some of the things this morning we talked about, the issues around skills and local engagement and productivity and driving the local economy are very much the outcomes from a lot of that financial input. So I think we've got a range of things that we've really discussed, a range of issues we've not resolved, but I don't think we ever set out to resolve them. We set out to actually start seeing some of the connections between a lot of those issues. But I think there's the piece of work that we need to try and take on further in due course around all of this. We've identified areas where, if there is adequate resourcing, we can actually increase productivity. We can actually impact on local economies. And the bit I was noting down there was to say, actually, I think we've got to make sure that we get a broad balance between urban economies and rural economies, because there is often a conflict that exists in highways and transportation around those two areas. What's necessarily good for urban and city environments sometimes mitigates against the viability of rural economies, so we just have to keep an eye on that. But then we've talked about the role of SMEs and the need for SMEs to have a bigger role to play in maintenance frameworks and the opportunities that that provides. And that doesn't necessarily mean to the exclusion of larger businesses, but it can often support the outputs of larger businesses and maybe make them sharper and more competitive and actually make them more focused. We've had some discussions around ADEPT and LCRIG increasing their collaboration, which I think is a really big take from this event, actually, because they look at some slightly different aspects of operation, often being different structures of local authorities as well, which means that you actually start to get a broader perspective. So I think there's a range of things that we've taken from. We'll be revisiting the recording of all of this to try and get some notes. And I'm sure Dom's already got his story written.
I was just going to say about that, George, is that I've probably bitten off more than I could chew. I was just thinking about whether I commit myself to write some sort of white paper, some key takeaways from today that maybe we could circulate and publish for whatever value that might add.
I think that would be, if we could do something like that, I think would be of great value. And I think it's the other important thing is that we would like to hear from delegates, and we're going to make the whole event available online and snippets of the event as teasers for everything to actually encourage a broader engagement and get, if you like, a long tail of contribution from people across the sector and across the industry. So I don't think there's very much more to say in summation. Otherwise we'll just start again and we'll be here for another 5 or 6 hours. But the most important thing is I think we've really kick-started a really worthwhile and productive conversation. I would like to thank everybody that's participated in it, everybody that's contributed to it through questions, everybody that's had a commentary or a perspective to present, and also to all of our presenters for giving us the time, which I know is actually the most valuable commodity that we've all got. Their time, their expertise and their knowledge to contribute to the event, and to say thank you again to Gary for actually driving forward the idea to have this event, and we'll make sure it's been time well spent.
Yeah, thank you, George, and I'll release everyone off video now, and we'll just quickly wrap up. Just to say you've thoroughly enjoyed the day and the insights that we've been able to pull together. Like we said, we'll see if we can get down some notes to make it to be an ongoing conversation, an opportunity to review the contribution and the presentations on our website going forward, and we'll make them widely available on our other social platforms as well. As a reminder to all panelists as well as delegates to make a decision regarding a charity that you can support with. A reminder that we're contributing as a company £5 to your designated charity of choice. That's Break and Sustrans and the Lighthouse Club. So if you indicate which one, we'll put that together and we'll make a donation. And also I would very much appreciate any feedback on the content and the delivery of this event. Obviously it's the first one we've done. I don't know there's that many more running as similar in this sector, particularly at the moment. So we want to try and grow that out. So once more, thanks to all the panelists and presenters. Particular thanks to George, who's with us here in Portsmouth. I don't know how much more we'll be able to do that sort of travelling after midday announcement, but much appreciated the way he's helped me get this vision into reality and to bring together all the content. So that only leaves me to say thank you very much from everyone at Meon. Very much appreciate your support. Let's work together, make a difference. Thank you very much and goodbye.